Okay, so thank you for coming, before anything. Before we get started, couple things. Please, I'm going to ask you to give a warm round of applause to all the volunteers, like Angelo, people helping the staff, and the Black Hat organization. Now, how many of you have ever used Windows? No, I don't believe you. You didn't get the question. How many of you ever used Windows? Okay, that's everybody. How many of you have ever done a penetration test? Okay, that's like half of you. How many of you have done a penetration test on a Windows network? All of the previous ones. Okay, you should have seen what we're gonna show you because it's so trivial and also so interesting. So who are we? So my name is Jonathan Broussard. I've been presenting here a few times. If you like low-level hacking, reverse engineering, and things like this, we run a couple conferences in Paris and Hawaii, so feel free to submit. So yeah, I'm part of the program committee of ShakaCon, and Moabi.com, it's a new reverse engineering platform I'm setting up. If you want to try it out for free, just sign up. It's invite only, but if you come from Black Hat, we'll approve it.
Right, so I'm Hormazd. I'm a security engineer at Salesforce as well. This is my first talk at Black Hat, so fingers crossed it goes okay. I'd like to point out that we're breaking Windows 10, kind of, sort of, but yeah, it is breaking Windows 10, breaking Microsoft Edge, released 5 days ago, so good luck with that. Yeah, that's about it. Right, so agenda. What we're going to go through today, basically we're going to do like an introduction to what SMB is, what kind of previous work is done for relaying SMB hashes, SMB Relay rebooted, which is basically us, our attack. Yeah, we have a couple of interesting attack names, courtesy Jonathan. French Kiss Attack, the Syphilis Attack, which includes malware, obviously, Ménage à Trois, and how do we mitigate against it? You want to give the IBM?
Okay, so let's imagine for a second we're back in like 1984 and we all work for IBM. So we're working on this awesome operating system called OS2 with a small startup called Microsoft. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. So basically we're trying to, on this operating system which is not even in protected mode yet, so it's read mode 16-bit, meaning that we have 1 megabyte of memory at max. We don't have multitasking. And what we're trying to do is file sharing. So doing file sharing without multitasking is a challenge in itself, because like doing TCP connections and things is super difficult. But essentially, that's where we are. And the big question mark is, how about security? In 1984, because that's where SMB and SIF, the file system, were actually invented. If you consider that in 95, when Microsoft first shipped Windows 95, the shares were actually open, because the rationale behind it was that if you buy a computer, is to put it in a corporate network, and you want to be able to share files with all of your colleagues without entering passwords. So now if we go back to 1984, like obviously there will be even less security, right? And that's where all the problems we're going to discuss today are rooted.
Right. So a quick demo of what exactly has been done previously. Forgive the video because it requires a LAN to do this. Right. So what we have here is basically a cool piece of software from Core Security which does SMB relaying. I'll explain more about that later on. We have a unsuspecting victim who's going to browse to some intranet website, which is basically in the LAN. And this website has got an image tag in it, which basically is going to do like some magic in the background or something like that. We'll explain that more later on. But what is happening over here is this browser sent Ntlm creds of the victim automatically to an unknown source, which is mind-boggling in itself. I mean, why would you do that? But fine, it's over the intranet, so you'd assume, okay, fine, whoever's in your LAN is kind of sort of safe. As you can see over here, it's basically the admin creds have been sent. And over here, you have, like, we are uploading some kind of malware payload. So fantastic. So we upload malware, we run it, we get a reverse shell, Bob's your uncle, and whatever. Right. So that is what has been done previously. So a quick walkthrough. What exactly is SMB? It's basically file sharing on your Windows network. It's server message block protocol, whatever you can call it. Linux calls it Samba. It requires authentication. Back in the day, there used to be basic authentication, which was basically sending your creds in plain text. Then it improved by doing LAN manager, which was basically MD4 of your credentials, which could be broken easily. Then it improved again with doing Ntlm v1, which was basically MD4 and HMAC MD5, and they would basically break the password into two parts, which you could break that really easily. The thing is, they came up with Ntlm v2, and Ntlm v2 is what we're going to be attacking as well today, and it was designed for local networks. Ntlm v2, like I mentioned, it's a server client challenge response kind of protocol. Basically, HMAC MD5 with MD4 hash of your password is used to sign all the messages. The good thing about this is it cannot be replayed, apparently. SMB Relay, which I actually showed you in the demo today, basically it's a really, really old exploit. It was found really, 14 years ago in 2001 by Certistic of CDC. The tool that I showed you right now is basically from Core Security. It's SMB Relay X. You can download it from online. There's a Metasploit module, so skiddies can use this. Fantastic. What it does is basically it replays a hash from one machine to another machine, and that's about it. It authenticates using that. The original attack scenario is very limited. It's basically only on the intranet. Those of you who have done penetration testing for Windows networks will definitely have done this before. Basically set up a rogue website and it'll start relaying hashes all across. Limits of this attack, we'd like to stress this a lot. Not possible over the internet. This is the mitigating factor apparently for this exploit.
I mean, the rationale behind it was that the initial protocol was never meant to be exposed to anything like the internet. It was built from the very start to create like corporate networks. And the first exploits being affecting only local network, people assume that the attacks we're going to show you today are just barely not possible.
Right. So there was a partial fix. Basically, you cannot replay the credentials to the same machine again. And that's it. You could break the hash. You could relay to another machine. You could do whatever you want with it. Interesting thing, this slide came up because I was telling Jonathan, like, when we were doing this research, like, we're basically repeating what everyone else is doing, only remotely over the internet. And Jonathan was just like looking at me like, did you realize what you just said? You're doing it over the internet, man. What the hell? Anyways, so SMB Relay rebooted. Yeah, demo time.
Okay, so we're going to start with demos all the time, and then we will explain you like what's going on underneath. Okay, so this is the attacker machine. We're setting up a relay. We're going to set Wireshark just to see what's going on in the background. So packet sniffer. And we're going to load a page using IE. And we can see that there is actually some traffic going on. And this is happening over the internet. So that's just not supposed to happen at all.
You can also see over here that we have a received challenge and a received authentication that we relayed over, just to prove that we're actually doing the replaying. Anyways, back to the slides. Right, so all Windows versions are affected, back from, I guess, 95 maybe, all the way to Windows 10, Edge. This is all default out of the box. What I'm trying to say out here is that your machine is sending Ntlm creds over the internet without doing any user interaction ever. So basically, you visit a website, that's it, done. You've owned. It's fantastic, right? This is another fantastic slide. Basically, Microsoft has a great mitigation blog on SMB relaying. This was published way back in like 2009 or something. But they're saying over here that the issue is not severe mainly because it's limited only to the local intranet. And I don't think so they ever verified that, but sure.
Okay, so if we look at IE, there is actually a setting to get to choose like where you're supposed to authenticate using SMB. So you can do anonymous logon. The default is to log on the intranet zone. So what I just described, you suppose basically it's leveraging single sign-on. So when you are using Active Directory and you're connecting to the shares of somebody else inside your company, you don't have to enter your credentials again. So this is the default. And there is also automatic logon with current username and password and prompt for username and password. What is interesting is that none of this actually works. If we look at the trigger, so the trigger is really trivial. It's basically like you redirect through an image tag or something like that. If you are attacking via HTML, you redirect via this image tag to a remote share on the internet, and that's it. That is the trigger. So we saw that SMB traffic is actually going on, which is not supposed to happen, right? Because the defaults were connecting only over the intranet and not like sending you credentials all over to the internet to anybody asking it. Okay, and if we look at the packets, like we can see the username in plain text, we can see the DNS, a whole bunch of stuff, and there is actually a derivative of your password, which is not like what we call the hash, as in a pass the hash attack, but which is like, derived Ntlm hash from your original password. So a hacker can get that from the internet. Let's look a little bit at like why is this happening. So we've been looking at, okay, this is just the setting box of Windows. If we look like, inside the debugger, like which thread is actually running, like we find that one. And then looking a bit, like poking around, we actually find the vulnerable DLL. So you can see on the right-hand side that this is the menu corresponding to the previous one. What is interesting up there is that this DLL is actually not an Internet Explorer DLL. It's a DLL which is in the system directory, and it's actually shared by many more applications and not just IE. And we're going to see what the impact of that. So we took this Windows setting, we took a snapshot of the registry, we changed the setting to another one. For instance, like, prompt for username and passwords every time. We took another snapshot of the registry, and this is a diff. So basically, the setting is actually stored in the registry, and this is working. But if we look at a trace of, running IE and connecting to a remote share using exploits, we can see in the next slide.
Yeah, sorry.
We can see that it's actually querying all those registry keys. So when you connect from the internet to a remote share, all those keys are probed, and none of them works or actually does anything. So we learned a few things out of this. We learned like which registry key is actually involved. We learned that the applications which fetch URLs, unless you're writing your own TCP IP stack, basically you're leveraging the one of Windows. And if you do leverage the URL mechanism of Windows, you are vulnerable, whichever application you use, because this is coming from the system Windows directory. Okay, let's go for another demo. So this time we're gonna leverage this trigger and actually push a malware from the internet. So it's assuming a couple things. It's assuming that the corporation you're attacking, the machine is domain joined, and that there is an SMB server exposed to the internet to relay to, belonging to that company. That's a pretty big assumption for the time being. So you can see the thing, like we put the attacker in green. We're asking the web browser to browse to attacker control web page. And that's essentially it. And if we go back to the command and control, we got a new shell in our interpreter. So we're going to pivot to like another process ID in memory. And then we're just going to push malware into this same machine. Okay, so it's migrated successfully inside another process running in the memory of the target victim. And now we can actually, so we have a shell on the machine. Like we can, list directories, browse directories, whatever. From the internet.
Right, so why exactly did we call it the Syphilis Attack, first of all? This was made up about 1 hour ago when we decided, okay, we are sending malware over the internet. Basically, we set up just any website. People know how difficult it is to set up a website nowadays, apparently. You can set it up on r/netsec, fool users into saying, check out these brand new exploits. They visit it with IE. I guess if you're on NetSec, you don't use IE. But you can visit it with IE. We get your creds. We attack your domain controller. We upload malware. All of this with ready-made tools. And apparently, this is not supposed to happen still. I like to keep emphasizing that point. But just malware upload is not enough, apparently. What about Ntlm using HTTP server authentication? First, I'd like to say some attack limitations to this first. SMB signing has to be disabled. This was one of the mitigations proposed by Microsoft, which doesn't allow you to upload any files to anything using SMB without SMB signing. It is disabled by default unless you're on the domain controller. People recommend to disable it because it's a huge performance impact. It's like a 20% performance, 30% performance impact. And you need SMB outbound on all of your machines from the firewall. This is an interesting slide. SMB signing must be disabled for certain corporate firewalls to work properly.
McAfee.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, so fantastic. The one mitigation that's there is disabled by default or whatever. Sure, not a big problem. Okay, another one that is basically, so people always say like, why? Okay, so it's not a big deal. You have to have SMB ports open. It doesn't matter. I have complete firewall security. I don't. All ingress firewall security is all set up properly. But not many people know that you can do RDP over HTTP. Apparently, it's a new feature in Windows Server. So here's a little quick demo of how it actually works.
So we'll give you the demo and then we'll explain what's actually going on.
So yeah, this is just showing RDP over HTTP working in the normal happy scenario where you have the creds and everything. So this is a Windows Rdp Gateway. Basically, you can set up apps, you can set up RDP connections. You can see there's a PowerShell, calculator. We're just going to launch calculator for now.
So you download a connection script, and if you double click on it, you get connected. And in this case, we choose to just execute a calculator.
Yep. So just one interesting thing out here, the authentication that you saw over here on this web page, Ntlm auto HTTP. So great.
So this solves the problem of going back to the network once you sniffed a hash, or when you want to relay, because instead, let's say I have your hash, I'm on the internet. If I want to connect to a machine inside your LAN, I still have to pierce your firewall. So instead of piercing your firewall over SMB, which is quite likely not going to happen because people don't allow incoming traffic using SMB when they're reasonable. However, this solves the problem because we can just relay it to RDP over HTTP. And if your servers are this enabled, that's how it works. There is nothing to pierce. So for this to work, we need to first sniff a hash, then we need to crack the hash to get like your proper, your proper credentials essentially. The username is always sent in plain text, but the hash needs to be cracked. For that, we need to we leverage GPUs. We have one machine with like 5 GPUs. It's using a very standard tool for hash cracking called hashcat, and we're cracking at 2 to 4 billion a second. So that's what the rack looks like. Yep. And so this key space we used for demoing was like a key space of 68 characters, so a mix of uppercase, lowercase, alphanumeric, and those special characters. Assuming you have a password length of 8 or less, we can break that in less than 3 days. And of course, like if you have a million hashes, breaking this million of hashes is not going to take longer. Like hashcat can, do all of it in a parallel way. So if we look at, I was like, but who's actually using this authentication of SMB over HTTP? I was like, probably nobody. So I gave it a showdown search, and no, actually a fair bit of people. The first one being Sony in Asia. I'll let you draw your own conclusions.
Right. So the impact of this. So what exactly did we do over here right now? We can retrieve your user credentials. Great. We need a hash tracking machine to do that. That's no problem. We have remote code execution. If you have SMB signing disabled, but that's always done because of performance or firewall reasons.
Anyway.
Yeah. The main users of IE are corporate environments, banks. Your bank always uses IE. So great for us, I guess. All your money is gone. However, this is not the only trigger that we found. There are other triggers against that create SMB connections. Like we already mentioned, there is one DLL. It's not just used by IE. It's used by literally everything in Windows for doing Ntlm auth.
So inetc plc.dll, if you link against that, you are vulnerable.
Right. So video trigger.
So let's try to instead of just using IE as a trigger, we're gonna try to use different clients. So for instance, we can leverage a media player, Windows media player, to redirect to HTTP. This is just because it's funny. I actually took a malware who was doing it, and I just happened to change the URL. This is a supported feature of Windows media videos. You can embed an URL which gets open automatically when you play the video. And if you do that, you can redirect this particular page to SMB, and you're set. So the rest of the demo is essentially the same thing. We got a meta-operator shell. Maybe, yeah, here we go. We're migrating to a new PID, process ID in memory. And this is it. We enjoying old shell. So what the user did was basically open a video and pair it. Any questions? Cool.
Right.
So let's go to the real thing. So this attack is called a ménage à trois. And instead of breaking the hash, like with the RDP demo, we're actually going to relay over the internet to a server, which is listening with the same kind of connectors, accepting SMB authentication over HTTP. So instead of using RDP, we're actually going to attack an Exchange server. I mean, many people, have Exchange servers when they're using Microsoft clients. So it seems like a reasonable setup. So Hormazd is going to start in the background a small service which will listen for incoming SMB. And the trigger is actually just Outlook. So you view an email, and just the fact of viewing this email, you didn't click on any picture or anything. It's actually sending you credentials over the internet to SMB server, listening. And this SMB server is relaying it to Exchange to the point that we're downloading your entire mailbox. This is not one email, this was your entire mailbox that you can see over there. Maybe. Yep, here we go. So we download like the entire mailbox in XML. And from a user perspective, like there's extremely little interaction. You basically received an email and open the email, and that's it. It gets viewed by default like when you open Outlook anyway. So interaction can be like absolutely zero.
Cut.
I think we call Hormazd.
Fine. Just like to point out over here, you can see the name of the sender, you can see the email IDs, you can see basically the subject of anything. So this is your entire mailbox over here. That's it. So we spam you emails and we get your entire mailbox. How many people use Exchange servers over here?
So this is very close to be wormable, right? Because once you download like the XML file from a corporate user, you have access to most of their passwords, but you also have access to all of their contacts and things like this. We could use that to send more emails, basically. Okay, so if we look back at like those demos, we've been doing it over Azure and AWS. So if you have either clients or servers on any of those, you are basically vulnerable. They don't do SMB egress filtering. So like we saw with the showdown query, there's actually thousands of servers allowing SMB connection over HTTP, and the defaults are unsafe. Like extended protection is not enabled by default, which is the only thing which would actually prevent this class of attack. Even if you have packet signing enabled, since we're relaying over HTTP, it's not going to protect you. However, extended protection would, but it's extremely hard to configure, and it's enabled nowhere by default. It wouldn't prevent you from, in any case, sniffing packets. It's all about relaying. So how to protect yourself? So like we said, the first mitigation is at some point you need to exit. You need to have an SMB packet which is exiting to the internet. So the first layer of mitigation is absolutely to drop SMB at firewall level, in corporate environment. This is actually the preferred remediation offered by Microsoft. And also, it sucks. Why? Because if you domain join on a laptop and you bring your laptop home, well, then you do remain vulnerable. So instead of doing network like in the 90s, like an egg, hard outside and soft inside, I much prefer a solution which is host-based hardening. So instead of relying on your corporate firewall, I would strongly recommend you actually use your Windows personal firewall to do the same thing, which is essentially dropping SMB traffic to public IPs. You can, if you want to keep the functionality within your network, that's probably fine. But I don't see any legitimate reason to send SMB packets over the internet. Or you're doing something insane, like exposing SMB servers anyway. So you might want to enable packet signing, which prevents. It won't prevent the packets from leaking and your hashes to be leaked to the internet. But if a hacker gets your hashes, it will prevent them from basically coming back to your network. And push malware like we first did. If you're using, if he's relaying to an SMB server, this will have. Packet signing is not going to prevent the leak of your credentials. Basically, it does kill the connection, but once the credentials have been sent. So in terms of preventing hash leakage, it doesn't work. And of course, enable extended protection if you can.
Right, so what's the takeaway over here? We managed to get your credentials over the internet. That's one. It's super simple to do. You have ready-made tools to do it for you. Literally, we didn't do like crazy amount of coding for this. It's a lot of ready-made stuff out there. It is not supposed to work according to Microsoft. We reported it about 9 months ago. They don't want to fix it because it's defense in depth you need. Like we said, you need to have egress filters on your firewall. We managed to steal your credentials through a variety of ways, through a website, through an email. Spam users download their mailbox through a video. My mom and dad would definitely open up a video easily. I could easily convince them to do that. Steal their credentials that way. You could upload malware. You relayed from SMB to Exchange. This is just a small tip of the iceberg kind of thing that uses Ntlm SSP. I mean, literally every Windows service uses Ntlm in the background to freaking authenticate everything. People use Kerberos nowadays, but Kerberos is limited because you have to be in the domain to do that. So Ntlm is still being used widely. We showed that we did it on Windows 10. Great news for that. Windows 10, Windows Edge, completely patched, nothing is going to block it. And it was all done remotely. Fantastic.
In terms of triggers, thank you. So interestingly enough, we stumbled upon this when we were actually working with Sergey and Shohan, who are presenting tomorrow on another class of attack, which is like a derivation of XXC. We saw, like this year, many attacks on XXC, and an interesting one from, an interesting post from Silence was absolutely related to what we're doing. First off, they were working on XXC, and they realized that when you can man-in-the-middle updates locally, many software actually can be forced to do an SMB connection instead of just, from an XXC, so from an XML file essentially. Vulnerable software include like a huge variety of software which are linked against the library we discovered. They include like things like iTunes, major antivirus, major clients for typical web protocols. The three we've shown belong to Microsoft, but a lot of third-party software are going to be affected by this. Basically, if you can put an URL anywhere and this URL resolves to SMB, you are vulnerable, period.
On that note, we'd like to say thank you to MSRC for working us with this. I'd also like to point out 14 years since this vulnerability has been found and nobody has done packet sniffing on Ntlm auth over HTTP. I'm pretty sure somebody's using it out there. Just FYI. Any questions?
So I started by asking who's done network assessments against Windows networks. How did you miss this? This is so obvious. Any questions? We got a mic? Yeah?
I noticed in your exploit that you were remotely getting the username and password, the username and domain name over HTTP in the sniffs that you showed.
Yep.
They're coming through in the clear. So that's a pretty big breach in itself, right? Because we're leaking the user's credentials, not their password, but you've got something to crypt
Passwords are in plain text, and you get hashes of the credentials essentially that you need to break or relay.
So that's a pretty big way to identify that user perpetually, right? And
sure.
It leaks something about the internal structure, the name of the company they're from, if they're coming off of an anonymizer or something. If I'm using Chrome, is that an effective mitigation?
Chrome does actually mitigate it because it asks you before sending any credentials.
We haven't checked third-party player. We haven't checked plugins, media players, and stuff like that within Chrome, which could very well be leveraging the very same API. As a web browser by itself, yes, you're right. Chrome is not vulnerable in the way IE is. Coming to your the question in regards to essentially information disclosure, in regards to what's happening inside the network when you try to client side a user. I don't think we care so much about information disclosure when we got shells. Like, you know, if the attack works, you get a shell inside the network. So like mapping the network, like you don't, there is nothing to guess, basically. You are inside the network. Any other question?
Yeah, so in that case that you just said, oh, you don't care because, oh, you're getting a shell. But, you know, in my enterprise, maybe I don't have anything exposed over SMB or RDP or anything. You're still leaking my name, which I don't want to change, really. It's a pain.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. Yep.
Just to be clear, if you're using a firewall on your computer or on your router, you're not vulnerable, right, to this attack?
If, by default, you are vulnerable, even if you're using a firewall. Absolutely.
You need to block certain ports to mitigate it, yeah.
But that's not the default, right? Like, you install your Windows machine, like, you're not safe, basically. You need to configure your own firewall to block SMB traffic to public IPs. Otherwise, you're going to break, like, file sharing within your LAN, which might be, you know, what you want. But by default, just because you have, like, you know, XP, SP2 or better, and that a firewall is embedded, since it's not configured to block it, like, yeah, you are vulnerable.
I wanted to ask if you guys had explored, you mentioned one of the major mitigating factors was outbound SMB. Have you explored WebDAV or the new features within Windows to have port specifications on the outbound connections?
So we tried within a large corporation I won't mention to come back inside your own network by creating basically holes, and I tried mostly with FTP, passive FTP. But we didn't try WebDAV and all that. I would say, you know, every technique we know to pierce firewalls, apply. If this is really the way you want to go back inside the network, yeah, you could do that. Any other question?
To make this attack work, the users have to log on as administrator or just any account in administrator's group because of the UAC?
As far as I know, any account.
Any account?
Yeah.
Okay. And any account can relate to RCE?
Oh, you mean when you what are you talking about? Like leaking hashes to the internet, or where can we execute and relay stuff?
Execute any program.
So to leak stuff on the internet, yeah, any account is vulnerable. Like you log in with your machine. If basically you can browse the web, you are vulnerable, period. When it comes to relaying back, so it kind of depends. The Exchange stuff we've seen, if you have a mailbox on Exchange, you own, period. No, there is, I see where you're going. You're asking me, are every user able to RDP? And no, it's not the case.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
Right, agreed.
One more. Can you put that mitigation slide back up real quick? And then what was that DLL again that you were speaking of? I don't think it's on that slide, but.
Okay, it's in a white paper anyway, which you should have access to. But the DLL is called inetc plc.dll, and it's under C Windows directory. There we go. Okay, any other questions? Yep.
In your initial repo there, where you were using IE with an image tag, were you then redirecting HTTP to an SMB URL, or how were you getting it to do an SMB connection?
The image tag automatically sends an SMB connection. That's it. We don't do any redirect, nothing.
Oh, okay.
You put an image tag, it does an SMB.
Was it to an HTTP URL?
Yes.
Good question, thank you. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah, yeah, tell me.
Yeah, so is it your understanding from communications with Microsoft that if that DLL was implemented correctly, it would be paying attention to the registry flags and not doing SMB auth, or is that something that Microsoft says is intended functionality?
I don't work for Microsoft. I don't know. You might need to add them. Like, oh, they want to patch this, and what is the deal?
Have they acknowledged that that is a flaw in that DLL?
They have acknowledged there is a problem. They are investigating, and they have for 9 months. One more question? Yeah?
How exactly was that payload with the interpreter shell? How was that delivered? Obviously, that was any firewalls or any hosting firewalls that they have. But how are you actually delivering that payload to the interpreter?
So you're talking about the very first demo where we're actually pushing malware? Yeah, you need to be able to connect back to SMB. That's the problem we discussed, right? So either it's exposed straight away on the internet, and it has a public IP and no firewall, and you're basically connecting. Otherwise, like, you cannot push malware that way. And if you have packet signing, you cannot push malware anyway. But that's why we have this enhancement, which is basically relaying over SMB over HTTP, and then there is zero mitigation.
Also, I'd like to point out that SMB allows you to upload files and execute them as services. So, yeah.
Any other question?
Yeah. Have you checked anything on Windows phones or tablets?
I actually have you?
Yeah, it doesn't work on that.
Okay, it doesn't work.
SMB is not a protocol supported by Windows phones, apparently. As far as I know. Just saying.
Excellent question. One more question? We set for today? One more? Yeah? I don't assume so.
Not really. Wait.
I haven't tested, but I mean, in terms of doing the HTTP connection, for sure, no. Like the connection happens via the proxy. Then what happens when the proxy is trying to resolve the SMB share? That is the real question. I don't know. I wouldn't assume that HTTP proxy settings apply to other protocols, but it's worth checking.
I'd like to add more to that. Basically, a proxy is going to replay. Most proxies do that. They kind of have either set credentials or they replay the same credentials over, because Ntlm works on the basically it authorizes your TCP stream. It doesn't authorize like that one particular request only. So so Ntlm ends at the proxy, and then proxy creates another Ntlm authentication to whatever it's trying to get.
No more questions? One more?
If you run SMB signing, does it work?
Sorry, what?
So we discussed SMB signing tremendously, right?
I missed it a bit earlier. So.
Did you get the question? I can't hear you.
Then it was nothing. It's okay. I asked if it works with SMB signing because I didn't see it before. It was a bit late.
Yeah, it does. The malware upload doesn't work with SMB signing, but you can still download Exchange mailboxes.
Any more question? Okay, I guess we're good for today. Thank you very much for your attention.